You want
Yeah,
to hear a story?
sure. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, it's like so San Francisco. It's like, I remember like when you had that incident when you were living in the Tenderloin and you got up early in the morning, you're going downstairs in the elevator and this guy got in there with a knife,
Yeah,
right? And he was out of his head to some degree. And I mean, there's a very real possibility that you could have been stabbed in that elevator in the Tenderloin.
yeah,
Um, so I mean, it's not as extreme as that, but I've been, you and I are always talking in terms of self-betterment and in order to be able to um reach our highest potential, we have these obstacles in our lives. And from a mythological standpoint, these obstacles oftentimes take the form of a dragon,
yeah,
right? So you have like the monomyth that Campbell talks about, the hero's journey. And you're leaving, you're starting from your place of comfort and familiarity and extending yourself out into the world, and you hit these moments of resistance, and sometimes they're ferocious, and they're beyond our previous ability to deal with them.
yeah.
And so one of the things that happened to me last week was, I typically get up pretty early in the morning. I'm usually up around like 4 or 5. And so the way that I work is I get up, pull myself out of bed, and then there's this coffee shop down the road. Do you remember Uncle Benny's when you used to live
Yeah, I do.
here?
Yep.
So so they open up at 4. They get there at like 3 in the morning. They're making their donuts, and then they open up, and then I go down there and I get my coffee. And there's these, I don't even really like their coffee that much, but the ladies behind the counter are so sweet. Like there's this lady from Hong Kong, and I walk in there, and she's just so sweet and nice. It's just a nice way to start the day, even though the coffee is like,
It's
not
terrible.
very good.
Terrible
Yeah, yeah. So
coffee.
it makes it palatable to have the sweet lady greet you first in the morning with the bad coffee, and then the lady that runs it. There's two of them. She's from Vietnam. The other one's from Hong Kong, and they're just kind, cool ladies. And so I go in there. This was on Tuesday, and I was going to hang out with my new girlfriend that night, and we're like, we've been hanging out too often. Let's try to like take it easy. So I was like, all right, I'll just come over in the morning and I'll do my morning thing. I'll get ready for my day. And so I go into this coffee shop. I walk in. There's some people talking. I go to the counter and I get my coffee. And then from behind me, I can hear these men talking. And this guy's like, it's only out of respect that I don't punch you right now. Right. This is like 5 in the morning, right? There's these guys behind me that are like ready to fight. And I look at the one guy and I recognize him from my drinking days that, he was, in the bar, and he was probably up all night doing coke, and he was like 5 in the morning trying to get some coffee. And then there's this other guy that's like wild haired. He's got a giant scab on his nose, and he's wearing shorts, in the middle of February. It's freezing out. And he's, clearly a street person. And they're arguing, and the guy's like, "Hey, I just bought you a cup of coffee. Like, why are you being like this?" And I'm
Hmm.
starting to look around, going like, "Okay, like how bad is this situation?" And I look at the girls behind the counter, and I said, "Is this a problem?" And they're like, "Yes, this is a problem." And I said, "Okay, is he bothering you?" And they said, "Yes, he's bothering you." And I'm like, "Okay." And I said, do you want him to leave?" And they said, "Yes." And I'm like, "Okay." So now this is my situation, right? Because the universe just got kind of put this together. And so now I turn around and I look at the guy and I'm like, "Hey, man, uh, how's it going?" And, the way that street people in San Francisco talk is they're wild. They can't put things together. And the guy's like not full zombie yet, like not civic center, like walking, walking around and you can't even like communicate. Like he's a little bit responsive, but he's crazy. And I realized, oh, this guy's just oblivious or belligerent, and you don't know what he's gonna do. And especially because he has this scab on his face, he's obviously not valuing his physicality. And I'm thinking, like, well, he probably doesn't value other people's physicality either. And I said, "Hey, the ladies don't want you here. So, we're gonna have to go outside. Like, we're gonna have to go outside." And I said, "Come on, let's go outside." And he's like, whoa, 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 you know what? I'm not doing anything. I'm a nice guy. These are my friends. And I'm like, listen, this guy wants to punch you. He's not your friend. And we got to go outside. And he says, I'm not going to go outside. You know, you can't do this. You can't, he's going into full on panic mode already. And I just like raise up my hands like this. And I just start walking towards him. Right. And you could see his eyes light up. And I'm like, hey, there's no problem here. There's no issue. We're just going outside. We're just going outside. And he's like, he doesn't quite know what to do, but he's standing back, staying back. And then he like kind of comes up on me a little bit, right? And he says, don't touch me as he's coming at me, right? And then I just put out my hand like this, like the force, I just put out my hand, I put it on his chest, and I said, we're going outside, right? And he's like, don't touch me, don't touch me. If you're gonna touch me, then why don't you just kill me? Are you just gonna kill me? You're just gonna kill me. So it's like full on, like 5:15 in the morning in a donut shop. This guy's like going into a full on panic attack that I'm gonna kill him, right? And I just calmly just keep walking him back the door, walking him past the door, walking him past the door. And as he's freaking out in my head, I'm like, I wonder if this guy's gonna swing at me. And
Yeah.
I already know in my head, like I'm doing this with one hand, I'm pushing him back, and I'm just knowing like if he's gonna swing at me, then I'm gonna duck, put my leg behind his leg, I'm gonna bend him over my leg, and then as he's on the ground, I'm gonna pull him by his collar and I'm gonna put him outside, and then I'm gonna shut the door. So I already know like what's gonna do it. And like I'm pushing him outside, and now like my heart's beating, like things are moving, and I'm just getting him outside, and he's starting to flail and panic. And as soon as I get him outside, I see these lights go on. I hear this boop boop, and the police are just right there. And they open the door and they're like, "Hey, what's going on?" And I just point to the guy. I don't even say anything. They look, and I just like walk away. So I go into the coffee shop. Grab my coffee. I walk out, and I'm done. And I'm like, whew, I'm like feeling it, got out of there. And so then I'm like, okay, get myself ready. And then I go to my girlfriend's house, and we're still like pretty new in a relationship. And she had like left me a key outside, right? So in the planners, in our building, she left me a key. It's in this little little bag, so it stays all clean. I open up the door, and I'm like, okay, I'm in the front door. And it's like I'm going through the castle, and then I go up, I get into the elevator, I go up, and then there's her front door, and I put in the code, which she put in, which is my birthday. Then I open up the thing, it's still all dark and dark everywhere. I take off my shoes, and I go like walk like through the room, like in this like secret chambers, it feels like. And then I go into the room, and I see the window there, and it's like just starting to turn from dark black to inky blue. And I remember like, oh, this is the darkest light. Like the darkest light is when it just starts to turn, like it's like resurrection light. It's like just after the winter solstice. It's like, oh, that's the darkest light. And I see her orchids there, and then like she's in bed. I just see this lump, and then I just like climb into bed, and it was like really sweet. And I'll just like leave that part right there. And then and I come, I'm laying there, and I'm realizing this is all within like an hour of waking up,
Yeah.
on this Tuesday morning, this incredible like San Francisco moment where you go and you slay a dragon in the morning, you slay a dragon, and then you go out and go through the castle, and then you get this moment of like meeting the princess,
Yeah.
or not really like saving the princess in this, but it's these kind of like little moments of overcoming obstacles while we're on our way to reach our highest potential that are forming all around us. And there's this overarching narrative of the hero or the warrior going out into the world to overcome obstacles and slay dragons to get the thing of highest value to add into our lives so that we can go forward powerfully. And so I just, and as soon as this happened, I saw that darkest light part, and I was like, oh, okay, like I got to tell Bobby about this one. I feel like it's right in there with the kind of archetypal patterns that we're dealing with all the time.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you went through a miniature hero's journey.
Like
Yeah.
you start off in a place of order at home, everything's fine, everything's normal.
Yeah.
You go out into the unknown, you face some anomaly, like that guy coming up to you.
Yeah.
And then you have a choice. Like, do you face it or not? Because you could have easily just ignored it
Right.
and gone on your way.
Yeah, and it was funny too because I was thinking, so last week we were talking about where is the me,
Mm,
and then the me is stretched out between in kind of a larger territory than we had first assumed, in the sense that, there's the me that I assume that I am, but then there's the me that reaches into potential, the me that I could be, that's also, very concrete in a lot of ways. And then there's this thing, this higher knowledge that can come into you in terms of like intuition and conscience,
mm,
that you're like, okay, well, I'm in this situation and it's clear that I should do something about, my conscience is going to yell at me if I don't do something right now.
yeah.
And so there's this higher form of information that's being downloaded that's situation specific.
Mm,
And then there's a connection to the me that's in that, because it's connecting to me. It's not connecting to other people, and it's connecting to the me that I am right now. And so there's this, yeah, because I run into that with my art too. It's like I'll do a line or I'll start doing a composition and I'll feel, oh, I should do this, but I shouldn't do that.
mm,
And then when I'm thinking, like, who's making that decision? Like I can't find it inside of myself. Like it
yeah.
doesn't feel like I'm making that decision. It feels like there's some higher order of consciousness or wisdom that's saying this is proper. I don't
Yeah.
know, like what's your read on that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's your conscience and it's telling you what to do and what your responsibility is in that moment. And like going back to my story in the Tenderloin, like I
Yeah.
don't think that I faced that chaos very well. Like, so I got up early in the morning. I went
Yeah.
downstairs to get coffee. I did that every morning in the Tenderloin. I don't know why,
Yeah.
because going out for a 4 a.m., 5 a.m. walk in the Tenderloin is
Yeah.
pretty crazy. But I don't know why, but I did
Yeah.
that every morning. And I get in the elevator and I haven't had a coffee yet. I haven't woken up yet at all. This guy pulls a knife on me, backs me into the corner of the elevator, and he says, "Are you the guy that's after me?" And
Right.
and so I was instantly put into this extremely chaotic situation. And I would like to think that I would have handled it well in that situation and known what to do or risen up to the occasion, but I didn't know what to do. I was kind of like frozen. And I just said, "Hey man,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a coffee, man."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Which
literally
is
what
a
I said to
reasonable
him.
response.
Yeah, and he finally backed off. And then I went and got a coffee. I came back and I saw him again in the lobby. And he apologized to me and said that he had a hit out on him. Like someone's out to
Hmm.
kill this guy. But I found like in that moment I wasn't ready for it. And that's the thing with chaos, is that when you reach that moment of chaos or the unknown or that dragon that confronts you, how you act in the face of that is what reveals your character. And in that moment,
Yeah.
my character
So
was
that's the you. That's the deeper you, right?
exactly,
Or the deeper me. But then
yeah,
it's also the deeper me that doesn't exist yet because it hasn't been acted out. So it's
yeah,
the
well,
deeper
yeah,
me that's in potential, and it takes the acting out to be able to make it real.
yeah. And I
So
think
that
yeah,
gap right there is what's really fascinating. It's like that gap between potentially real, which is more real than real, and then the actually real, which is dependent on action.
yeah. And I feel like that potential realness calls to you and tells you what to focus on and what to do. And that's kind of like your
Yeah.
conscience, or like Jung's idea that the your future self is calling to you in the present, telling you what is meaningful and what you should focus on. Because
Yeah.
in that chaotic situation you were in, that's where potential manifests. So you became more through that situation. So it wasn't just your current person, your current self, your current state, who you were. It's like being in that situation pushes the spirit of transformation up in you and forces you to change. Because
And it's interesting too, because you think like, oh, okay, I'm becoming something new now. However, what it is that you're becoming is genetically encoded into you from your ancestors. So the newness that you're becoming is actually an ancient pattern.
Yeah.
Because that's what it means to be like a human, like a real human. And what has been defined as a real human has been that which persists throughout time. So your new you is actually becoming an ancient human.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting dichotomy, like a push-pull paradox as well.
Yeah, definitely. It reminds me of Pinocchio.
Yeah.
How he has to go into the belly of the whale to rescue his father. That's like
like Jonah.
The end of the hero's journey. And it's similar with the ancient Egyptian myth of Osiris and Horus.
Yeah.
How Horus battles Set, who's effectively Satan, and he loses his eye in the battle. Now he could have just finished there, but what he does is he descends into the underworld, finds his dead father who's in a state of torpor, and he gives his father his eye so that his father can see. So it's basically like going back to the oldest traditions of our ancestors and then bringing them into a modern light. And like you said,
through awareness and vision.
Yeah, yep.
Because that's what Hermes is too. Is the eye, right? The all-seeing eye.
Yep. Yeah, so it's an awareness of, it's like a bringing together of tradition and the spirit of the hero itself, like the spirit of all our ancestors that have been heroic in the past. Those patterns of action or spirits seem to be encoded in us, like they're in our genetics. And when we put ourselves in a situation where it's chaotic and there's a lot of unknown, that spirit can manifest itself. So it's like the oldest, like kind of like aggregation of heroic patterns of action that rises up in you in those moments. And that's part of me, I guess, is all of those heroic patterns of action in a way. But it's hard to identify that as me because it's coming from somewhere beyond you in a way.
Yeah. And, one of the things that we've talked a lot in the past too is that, especially because we're both creative people, to be fully human, you have to find your own voice that stands alone in the wilderness and is truly unique. And once you have that, like Krishnamurti says, the path to truth is good for one trip and one trip only. It's like you find your path to truth. I can't follow that. It's not going to be there for me. But you have to find your own unique relationship with the God image. And then once you do that, you become the universal human.
Yeah.
So in our supreme uniqueness and singularity, we find the universality of being human.
Yeah.
It's like once you push right up against this, it breaks into paradox.
Exactly.
That's why the rational can only go so far,
Yeah.
Where now you start getting in this mode where consciousness takes on a texture of feeling patterns. It's like I remember it's like when you fall in love, which is different than just being in love. Like you fall in like before you fall in love, like what it is. Like anybody can ask you and you're like, yeah, I know what it is. You can describe it and you can write it down and it would pass the Turing test, I guess, for humans. So whatever, like everybody would just say, like, what it is. Then you fall in love, which is a feeling, and you're like, oh, I didn't know what it was at all before. But now I know, but it's really just a feeling. And then there's no rational way to get there.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So we're kind of teasing with this boundary condition that anything further, when you go into the transcendent and the divine, you have multiple things being true at the same time, and they're paradoxically oriented in relationship to each other. And it stretches out even further and it just keeps going. So it is truly the chapel perilous, when you start pushing out here. And I think that that's why this type of work, especially for artists, is so dangerous, because you extend yourself out into the unknown possibility to such a degree that you can lose your anchor back here. And then once that silver thread breaks, you just float, you know? And then maybe that's what happened when Nietzsche, when he hugged that horse, you know? He just finally hit that last thread and went bink. And then he just started drifting.
Yeah.
And couldn't come back. It's terrifying to think of, but it's important to at least name that territory, I think.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? The artist and their relationship with insanity? Because it seems like as an artist, you're constantly pushing into the transcendent, into the unknown. Like artists are the people who go from the known into the unknown and bring something back of value. But it seems like there's a very high possibility if you go deeply into that you're going to lose your mind. Tons of artists do. Like,
because
how do you think about that?
Because you can go, like, your mind can conceive the beginning of the universe. You know, your mind can conceive what's inside of a black hole. Your mind can conceive the beginning and end of time. And so an artist, they'll get into these modes where and you and I do this all the time. I've seen you do this multiple times, and you've seen me do this multiple times, is we get an idea that has a feeling quality to it that's so entrancing and intoxicating and amazing that you just keep following it and following it and following it.
Yeah.
And it's all in the realm of imagination. But then part of being an artist is you can't just dwell in the imagination. You have to bring back an artifact, and that artifact is physical. And the physical world has limitations, right?
Yeah.
So you could, and then so the imagination and the material don't line up. And then that break is your brain can't deal with it because it's so hard to dwell in the fantasy and not being able to ground it in reality. And so what you can do is keep pushing into the fantasy part rather than figuring out the material part. And then once that becomes like a habitual mechanism, it's an escape. It's a way of not dealing with the world. It's a way of still being able to have all of your genius, but it doesn't have to be proven in reality, because you know, you might have this idea of like, I want to paint this picture, and you know, in order, you know, and then you start using the paints on the material, and then the colors just aren't coming out, you know. And so you're like, well, I imagine this color, but my skill set or the limitation of the materials is only allowing me this color. And that friction in between the material and the realm of pure consciousness is so jarring and intense that for some artists, I think it just breaks. And then there's also the reinforcement mechanisms of that pain, of dealing with that pain through like alcohol or sex, or, you know, any one of these like really disruptive practices that can really undermine your psychology. And then if somebody's famous, you know, now you're putting extra energy onto it. So it's kind of just like a storm of pressure that hits a friction point that's conceivably insurmountable. And what breaks is the individual trying to hold the vision and not, you know, I think that's what's happening with like Kanye right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is something I'm struggling with because I feel like the more I go into my artistic process and writing process, the more I'm suffering. To a point where it's almost unbearable. It's every day. And I don't know how to deal with it except just enduring. Like it seems.
What's the suffering specific? Where's the suffering come? Like is there an action or a certain quality of the writing experience that triggers the suffering?
Yeah, so like I've had a big shift in the way that I write and the way that I'm approaching the artistic process in the last year and a half. So like, you know, I've been studying storytelling for a long time and trying to think about the structure of stories. And that's a very rational thing to do. So I kind of approached it like an engineer, where I'm thinking about like what's the first act and the second act or the third act or the stages of the hero's journey. Like there's all sorts of different theories about the rational structure of stories. And when I started writing scripts, what I would do is kind of take that rational structure and then top down try and build a story around it. And I would like outline it. and say like, okay,
Yeah.
here's the first act, and this is this stage in the hero's journey. But I found that it always fell apart when I did that. I didn't find any deep
Okay.
meaning in there. And then I was thinking about Jung's active imagination process.
Yeah.
And I was also listening to a lot of Tarantino. And Quentin Tarantino, his writing process, he thinks of it as method writing, where he says like all those like books and pamphlets about story structure, he's like, who cares about that? He's like, what I do is I engage my imagination, put myself in a setting, put the characters in that setting, and then I let them talk. And
Yeah.
he sees himself as more of like a stenographer that's just like writing down, documenting what's happening. So I've had to switch up my whole writing process from more of a top-down view to that more of a bottom-up view, where I engage my imagination and I let the characters speak to each other. But it's always painful as hell when I do it. It hurts.
Why is that? Where's the pain part?
I don't know. It seems to just emerge while I'm writing. Like it's a pain in my heart. And it's
Is
like
it because you're like leaving yourself?
it
Like you're
might
going
be.
into this other place and
Yeah.
there's like an abstraction away from yourself, and then who it is that you are is trying to keep everything contained, but you're
Yeah,
like
yeah.
is that, I mean, that's a
I'm
crazy thought, but
I'm putting myself into the unknown consciously, and
yeah.
the unknown has a negative affect to it. So you suffer
Okay.
when you go into the unknown. And
Yeah.
that's why, but when I go into that state and I write scenes like that where the characters just emerge and speak with each other, it
Yeah.
produces the best writing, and it always surprises me because I'll get to, and I specifically push myself to the end of the scene even if I don't want to. And it reminds me of like when I go for a long run and I push myself really hard. You know, like
Yeah.
the last 10 minutes of a hard run
Yeah.
where your body's just telling you stop, like,
You're
or your brain.
channeling Goggins, and you're like,
Yeah,
Goggins said when I
exactly.
hit my limit, there's 30% more. It's in there somewhere. And you're
Yeah,
just
and
like,
I
why
hear
am I doing this? Yeah.
yeah, I hear
Yeah.
Goggins in my head. He's like, don't stop when you're tired, stop when you're done. So then
Yeah.
I keep pushing, and it's in those moments where I do like find a way to transcend that pain. But it's exactly the same with my writing process, where like when I'm writing a difficult scene, it hurts like hell. But if I endure that pain and keep pushing the scene to its end, it seems to become meaningful. And that's the thing with like suffering and art, is that
Yeah.
if you accept the suffering and you go into it and you take responsibility for what you're doing, then you find enough meaning to offset the suffering in a way.
But is there usually when you're having an extreme um focused emotional response to something, it usually means that's only half of the experience, that there's a euphoric side to. Like, do you go, like, is there a euphoria first? Like, maybe the euphoria drives you into wanting to write in the first place because you have an idea and you're like, oh man, I want to write this down. There's the euphoria. And then you start writing it down and you're like, ugh,
Yeah.
ugh, ugh. So it sounds like that's what I'm talking about in the artistic process of the the difficulty of the physicality of the words on the page lining up with the vision that you have
Yeah.
in your head, and the two not being harmonious is your own self judgment that it's not good enough.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Is that close?
Yeah, yeah. And to your earlier point,
Okay.
like I think that when I initially go into the writing process, I do have this kind of euphoric feeling, this positive feeling going
Yeah.
into it when I start writing. But then every scene is like a descent into hell where I suffer like hell. And then I come out of it on the other side, and there's a euphoric feeling at the end. And then you read the scene and you can see that it's meaningful, and you're like, damn, that was worth going through. It reminds
Yeah.
me of what Hemingway said about writing. He said, writing is easy. All you have to do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
and I think that's exactly right. And I've had, because you made a good point earlier that you could have like a vision for something. Like you have a deep vision in fantasy, but
Yeah.
but the hero's journey doesn't end with that. The hero's journey ends with bringing that into a physical thing in the world that you can share with other people. And like
Yeah.
you said, that's the tough part, because you're trying to take this irrational, transcendent vision and put it on paper, either as a painting
Right.
or in words. And that's just rife with limitation that can't effectively contain what you're trying to put on the page, and it hurts.
Yeah, because the vision, when you have it, has that feeling when you're like, this is going to work.
Yep.
This is going to work for sure. It's 100% it's going to work. And then you start to craft it and sculpt it. And you're like, ooh, like this might work. Maybe it won't. It kind of does. And then that process of the bleeding, like, because Hemingway was a cutter, he was just like, cut, he's like,
yeah,
just reduce, like cut the fat, kill your babies, just try to get the sentence to say one true thing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it makes sense to be bleeding like that. But then there's the other people like, Proust, Swan's Way.
Yeah.
It's that guy. But anyways, he does the opposite, right? Where he's just like,
yeah,
more and more, more and more words, more and more decoration, more and more flowering, more and more, like Tom Robbins is like that too, very psychedelic. And but it seems to be, you just have a really, really high standard for yourself, and you're ruthless. And so that's a natural, I mean, I have that too, which is brutal, but the thing that will alleviate that suffering is actually getting to the other side of it.
Exactly.
And everything before the other side is just going to continue to suck.
Yep.
So you actually have to save yourself. You have to save yourself by giving birth to this thing that if you get it out, it's going to be amazing. But if you don't get it out, it's going to be cancer.
Exactly. Yeah.
How about that one?
Yeah. And that's the thing, is I feel like I'm climbing a mountain that only I can see.
Yeah.
And I can't stop climbing the mountain because that's cancer. That's entropy.
Right.
I'm like, that means I'm giving up on the vision that I initially had of the top of that mountain. But climbing the mountain is just brutal. And it seems to get increasingly brutal because I'm constantly self-criticizing and harshly judging myself, because as soon as you set a goal for some kind of artistic endeavor, you create a judge. And it judges everything, every action that you're taking, every word that you're putting on the page, every line that you're putting on a canvas, telling you that's not good enough, that's not true. Like, and
then that becomes, it's not that the work is inadequate, it's that you are inadequate.
Yeah.
And that's where the pain is. It's like, if it's just the project and you're like, okay, maybe this project can fail, or maybe I need it to fail in order to give me the necessary information for the next project to be successful. Now it's like, I can't do this because I'm not good enough and I just don't have it in me. So once it goes into that realm, it's like a gradation. And once it goes into that fundamental, judgment of being itself, then that's where the hell comes in.
Yeah.
Because before that, when it's just a project, that's more like kind of flavoring for the stew. It's like, you want a little bitter, you want a little black with your rainbow, you want a little, that's what makes it interesting. And that tension of struggle makes it interesting. But then when you get into, I'm going to burn in hell forever because I'm worthless. Which is like my tradition of what I grew up in the church. Like that's what is specifically taught to children in Sunday school. So messed up. That, that's when you're getting into true mental illness. And I think that everybody is doing that to some degree because we're all trying to achieve things that are beyond us, and we're all failing.
Yeah.
And even when you do have radical success, it immediately goes away as soon as you wake up the next day. So we're just in a constant state of failing forward, but we don't realize we're moving forward. It just feels like we're falling backwards. It's like my girlfriend, she had a good one. We were playing tennis, and I hit a good, I'm always like trying to work on my personality because I have like rough stuff, like hit this really good shot. And I was like next level. And because I was being egotistical, she goes, previous level. I was like, oh, damn it. I was like, oh, you got me on that one.
Yeah.
But it was super fun. But it's all just part of the process, you know?
Yep.
But yeah, it's brutal. But that's why these kind of conversations are so important, and to be able to know that, you know, we're all dealing with it. And it's, you know, this moment of like self-judgment and evaluation is always done in private because it's our most intimate space. And
Yeah.
even that, you know, you go out into the world with a brave face and try to bring your best energy into a situation, but inside you're in turmoil. And so that's why, you know, being in dialogue, I think, is so useful. And, you know, we really are in a moment in history where these kind of dialogues, you know, are possible now, you know, with technology and being able to share and be open. And, you know, social media, for all of its horrors, is shining a light into a deeper domain than we've ever been able to see before. And so I think when we gain a little bit of maturity and wisdom around it, it's going to ultimately be good. But
Yep.
right now it's brutal, but it is so helpful to be able to see somebody else down there in the shit. You know, you're like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. It's not just me.
Yeah. And people don't really share this often. Like,
No.
most of the time, and people don't want to have conversations like this a lot of the time. Like,
Well, and it's hard to even find the language for it too. It's like I remember when, you know, I worked in a wine bar a long time ago, and people would say like, you know, I wanna something. And I'm like, wait, yeah, well, wait, you know, they just don't, they know they have a thing in their head that they're trying to go for, but they don't have the language to describe like, you know, big, juicy raspberry, you know,
hmm,
tight up front, fat as it finished, you know, whatever it is. And so
yep,
you'd always be running into this problem with language. And for me too, when I go out and I'm meeting with a client and they have an idea of what it is that they want, and I know what I can and can't do, and then we have to language the thing before I can even start to sketch it out, to draw it, to see if we can even start. And it's brutal to use language to describe this invisible territory. And what it
hmm,
is that we're doing right now is describing an invisible territory. So you have to,
exactly. Yeah.
it's just really difficult to do. And
Yeah.
and people appreciate it when they hear it, but it's also, most people just want to just enjoy their lives and go on. You know, I mean, just go,
Hmm.
you know, they don't want to just like constantly be evaluating, you know, the difficulties of just getting through the day and what it all means. And you know, it's rough, but I don't know, we're just, it's just, I don't know, we just
Yeah.
like that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I feel like most people are suffering deeply in private. Like,
Yeah.
and that's something really tragic that, like, most individuals, when they're suffering, hide it from the world. They would rather put on a happy face in front of everyone, say everything's good, or like put on a persona in public, and then they hide that, like, the worst in them, or the parts of their suffering. And like, I find conversations
Yeah.
like this and with you really helpful because I can talk about the worst in me and talk about how I'm suffering. But it's very,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because I think that, like, why do people hide that? Is it because when they do talk
Well,
about their suffering, people reject it or shut them down? Or
w- well, because we're fundamentally strangers to each other and we don't have a lot to go on, and we have to evaluate the unpredictability of possibility when we encounter somebody else. It's like why business people just dress in suits all the time, because you have an outwardly, or like you go to downtown San Francisco and there's like the finance bro uniform, which is the Patagonia
yeah,
vest
sleeveless
over a
vest.
check, you know, with the khaki pant, you know, and you're like, why do all these people dress the same? And
Yeah,
it's because they want to signal to each other, I'm playing the game, I'm trustworthy, and finance is risk averse. Like you want stability, right? So you don't want somebody to be telling you about their inner experience. What you want to do is feel like this is a safe place to invest my time and energy and capital. And so we're always like, if some, like when I had that encounter with that guy in the donut shop and I saw that giant scab on his nose, I was like, okay, this is next level, because this is somebody that has a disregard for his own physicality and probably has a disregard for other people's physicality. So that's way different than being in an argument, even though there was no physical altercation that happened. He was signaling me that this is in your life. Like, this is a part of who it is that you are, which is physical damage. And that made me go like, okay, this is serious. I need to get this guy away from these girls, you know? And yes, so it's interesting because we have to be dealing with these like thresholds of familiarity and intimacy with each other, you know, in order to be able to trust each other. Because I can't just go up to a stranger and talk about my deep psychological issues, because if they don't have the necessary amount of care for me and I entrust them with this and they mishandle it, maybe just because they don't care, or they're like, yeah, like, get away from me. And I'm like, oh my God, I just opened myself up to this person. And this is like high school stuff, you know, because you don't have you don't know how, so everything's an experiment, everything's overwhelming, everything's like a new category that you've never encountered before. And so you just have to learn over time. Like there's a moment to be able to share, and there's a moment to just talk about the weather, how the Niners are doing, or, you know, it's what I've always, you know, had a big critique with people who are like, God, I hate small talk. And it's like, well, yeah, but you got to lay the foundation of small talk to just know that this other person's not like mentally compromised, so that you even want to. So it's just like, it's not a binary. It's like this kind of you know, gradient that stretches out over time, and there's different like stations where you're like, okay, I'm comfortable to share this much, I'm comfortable to share this much. It's like why we love comedians, right? Because they take that whole inferred pattern and then they subvert it, and they're like, well, I'm going to say that, and they mess it up, but then keep it together. But they're able to do that because they're on stage, and they're not actually in a dialogue. But when you're in a dialogue, you have to be like, okay, I'm willing to go this far. Can you meet me here? Yeah. And then you say a bit, and like, okay, I can meet you here. And then, you know, but then when you have somebody that's performing and taking the space, you're like, oh, now we can do these non-ordinary states of consciousness and kind of mess with things. But in general, it's like, yeah, you want people to read like they're not a threat. But then for people like us, when we look at these finance bros, you're like, you're so lame. This is so lame. Like, why are you doing this? And it's like, well, I don't know. It's just hard. It's hard to tease it all apart because it's complicated, you know. I mean, somebody like that could be saving the world, you know. They could have an NGO in Africa that has 100 schools. They, you know, and the only way they get funding is to go into Salesforce Tower and extract millions of dollars to be able to make it happen. But you know, I don't know. It's a tough one because I'm super judgmental a lot of the times.
Yeah, and like you said, it comes down to trust, and there's like levels to that trust. Like you have small talk with someone to lead to big talk, and not always. Sometimes you just have small talk with someone, it stays as small talk. But sometimes you have a bit of small talk, you get a feel for each other, have some trust for each other, and then it gets into big talk. Like I always find this fascinating with Uber drivers. Like some of the most deep conversations I've ever had with people are with random Uber drivers, where I'll get into an Uber, we'll have a couple of minutes of small talk, we'll get a feel for each other and get some trust, and then we'll just open up to each other. So I feel like there are people out there that are craving these kind of conversations, and it's good to let that off your chest and be able to speak about that deep stuff, even if it's just a random person that you met temporarily.
But that's very low risk too, in the sense that you're probably never going to see that Uber driver again. So you can risk more. Whereas if you're at a cocktail party or a company party and you really opened up in that same way, like you run the risk that if you say something devastating, you could suffer real reputational harm and people might not want to work with you. And that's intuitively on the table, even if it's not rationally on the table. There's a part of us that knows that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I like working in the tech industry and just seeing the corporate world up close. There's this mantra in the tech world about the culture of companies saying, bring your full self to work.
Yeah, right. That's such bullshit.
I'm
Nobody
like,
wants that.
I'm like,
Keep your, my mantra of my company is keep your full self away from me. Curate your best self. Curate your best self.
yeah, I'm like, do you know what my full self is? Like,
Yeah,
I barely know what it is, but I know it runs
right.
deep and it's
Yeah.
terrifying and it contains a bunch of stuff that you probably don't want me to bring up at work.
Right. It's also very inefficient. Like, how can you undermine your own ability to keep your eye on the goal more than bringing in a bunch of unnecessary psychological chaos into a workflow where now it's like you're having a meeting to try to solve a problem and you're like, you know what, my grandma told me when I was young that people really shouldn't X, Y, and and all this
Yeah.
like that. We're just trying to get the thing done.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the moment that we're having right now. In culture, but that's all necessary to be able to be worked out. It's like, it pushes and you're like, oh, that didn't work. And then it comes back and then it pushes and comes back. And, I have to believe that it'll find its way, especially when things start getting rough again. When things start getting, the, was it the necessity is the something of mother of invention?
Mother of
It's
all
like
invention.
necessity. It's like that's because things are rough. So you can't be indulgent in all these
Exactly.
other non-necessary things. You gotta like really get things done. But we live in the most affluence that any human being has ever lived in, really, as a whole, than any other time in history. So we don't even know how to deal with this new psychological development here. It's never had a chance to develop before because people coming up to this point in history have just been suffering, starving and dying of disease and just trying to stay warm in the winter. And they've never had the luxury of being this indulgent.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yep. Yeah, and I feel like a lot of companies have been kind of possessed by ideology. And I think
Hmm.
that's what happens in companies. It seems to be over and over again. The rise and fall of companies is that they get possessed by an ideology and then it distracts them. And I feel like a lot of the tech world today is possessed by this ideology of endless progress. And it's
Yeah.
all these like futuristic visionary narratives. Everything's great. We're going to have endless growth into the future. But I feel like in the tech industry right now, we're hitting a limit where I feel like the internet has kind of matured now.
Yeah.
Whereas for the last 30 years, it was in this like frontier era growth mode. So we
Right.
constantly pushed this progressive ideology, and that was good to an extent because it showed people what ways we could act in the future to get benefit from this technology. But now a lot of it's a commodity, and those narratives aren't working anymore. And now I feel like a lot of the companies are like possessed by this ideology of like being overly positive and like just thinking that
Yeah.
there's endless growth in the future.
Right. And then there's these moments where a company will make errors, like do some real social harm. And as you're like growing into the future, you're like, okay, well, what sort of like real consequence do you have to take into account when you're working with these companies that are trying to figure out their ideology or their own um, value system? Like the other day, I was out shopping and I was in a consignment store and I bought this shirt, and then I got it home and I realized it was a Hugo Boss shirt, right? And I'm like, well, I guess I support the Nazis. You know what I mean? Because Hugo Boss was the one that created the Nazi uniforms in World
Yeah.
War II. And so then I was just like thinking about it for a while, and I'm like, so do I just forgive Hugo Boss, or where's the accountability, or at what point do we all just like, you know, let IBM be IBM with no consequence, let Volkswagen be Volkswagen
Volkswagen.
without consequence,
Yeah.
Von Braun got the first men on the moon, like that guy was, top tier Nazi, and like what's my responsibility? Like, do I just never buy a Hugo Boss shirt again? Like, so it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting because it does, we talk about, where is the me? And then if you just kind of shift that a little bit to the company, well, part of who the me is, if you're Hugo Boss, is that you're a Nazi, not only a Nazi sympathizer, but you helped build the war machine. I mean, the Nazi uniforms are like the sweetest army military gear ever made. I mean, that's what you're bringing to the table, And like, how do you even hold that? Like, where's the me in a company? And then, you've brought this up a bunch of times. Like, one of the big distinctions and why we should never give corporations the same rights as individuals is because a corporation has the potential of never dying.
Yeah.
And so where's the me in the corporation there? I don't know where I'm going with this, but it was just an interesting
reminds me of
thing to bring
that idea of separating the art from the artist. And I'm always talking about this, and I would love your thoughts on it. Like, take Bill Cosby, for example.
Right.
Got great comedy, did terrible things. Can you
allegedly?
Can you actually no. He probably did. But how do you
he got off on a technicality, I think.
Okay, I didn't even realize. I haven't followed much of his.
Yeah, it was like there was like a procedural error, and so the case was thrown out or something like that. But he's supposed to be touring.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah.
Have you heard about that?
Yeah, and I'll go see him live.
It's like, what are his names is what do you name his yeah, I would probably see it. Would I see it? I don't know if I could probably be talked into it pretty easily. But like you know how OJ wrote that book, If I Did It?
I know.
You know, and then Cosby comes out with this tour, If I Did It,
Yep.
No, I don't know. This is a terrible line to explore. But yeah, I mean, it's the distinction between art and artist. I think it depends on what the art is and what the person did. It's like, Van Gogh, when he was in Arles and had his big falling out with Gauguin and was losing his mind, the people of Arles, the little town in France that the Yellow House was in, where he painted, some of his most masterful work, they were so afraid of Van Gogh that they came together as a town and wrote a letter to the mayor that this strange man was following women into their houses and like touching them inappropriately. I mean, this is like horrendous horrendous kind of actions. But it's speculated now that he had frontal lobe epilepsy, probably had syphilis, was just a terribly troubled person. And his art, his painting, had elements of that dark and light battle in it. And so on the one hand, you could say that Van Gogh was a pretty screwed up person that, really hurt people. And then on the other hand, it's like all of that struggle and that humanity goes into his paintings. And that's part of what makes his paintings amazing, because they're so full spectrum of the darkest of darks and the lightest of lights, and that gets so with that, you're like, okay, well, that's, I don't know, there's almost like kind of value in that. But then you look at Cosby, who is put up as like America's dad in the Cosby Show, and his act was all wholesome, and he was portraying something as himself, which ends up being deceptive. And part of the art is being able to relate to the person that's saying the words. And now that you can't relate to that person, the whole story changes, because the story's not the story. It's like when you're, this the Peterson thing, when you find out that your wife is cheating on you, all of a sudden you don't know who your wife is anymore, because you don't know what the real story is. You don't know what your marriage is, and you don't even know who you are anymore. And so you don't even know what life is anymore. And that's like with Cosby lying to everybody, you don't know who he is or what it is. And so the art of being able to take you along on a mental journey, through a stand-up routine, falls apart, because you can't get out of this like, oh yeah, you're that guy that took advantage of all these women, and that's just dark, and I can't get to the place of funny with that. So in that example, I think the person severely undermines the quality of the art. But with Van Gogh, not so much, because
Yep.
So it depends on the medium and the person and the artist. The particulars matter, I think, in this one. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'm always torn about it. And
Yeah.
but here's the thing, I find that I'm most interested in the artists that have that much darker side. Like,
Yeah.
But to your point, it depends on whether that their dark full self is being represented like that in their art. Because the problem with Bill Cosby is he's representing on stage and on TV this happy-go-lucky American
Right.
dad, but then behind the scenes, he's a totally different person. Like, one of my favorite writers ever is Charles Bukowski.
Yeah.
And Charles Bukowski was a terrible person in a bunch of ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
That one interview of him kicking his wife on the
yeah,
couch because they're both like hammered and arguing. Have you ever seen that?
yeah.
Oh my God, dude, it's brutal.
Yeah, and I've read tons of Bukowski's work. He's probably my
Yeah.
favorite writer of all time.
Yeah.
But he was kind of a sick guy as well, and like very nihilistic in a sense, but not totally,
Yeah.
but he put that into his
So,
art at least. So his
okay.
art and his writing shows all of that. So there isn't a separation
Yeah.
between the artist and the art in a way, because he was showing it fully.
But don't artists get a little bit more space to explore their sovereignty because their job is to shed light on all aspects of being a human?
Yeah.
And so in order to be, like, do you know Francis Bacon, the uh British
I've heard of him.
artist? He wrote
Don't know
these,
much about him.
he would paint these giant paintings. His famous one is the Pope, like a Pope type figure on a black background in a bed that's waking up just screaming. Really dark stuff. I mean, really, really, really dark stuff, and incredibly troubled person. And or maybe a better example is the Geiger, right? The
Oh
guy that
yeah,
created Aliens, right? You're
very
like,
dark.
what? How did this get into the mainstream?
Exactly.
But there's something about like Halloween. It's like there's something necessary about Halloween being a touchstone point for people grounding out darkness.
Yeah.
And so artists kind of need to have the freedom to go into those dark places, because if you don't represent those dark places, then they push out into society anyways in these really demented ways. It's like there's that Jung quote, something like, you're going to remember this better than me, but it's about the unconscious, and if you don't see it, it'll manifest in your life and you'll call it fate.
Exactly.
Do you know that one?
Yep. If you don't make
I butchered it, but
yeah, if you don't make the unconscious conscious, it will manifest itself as fate. So
yeah,
like the unconscious is playing on you all the time. And if you don't become conscious of it, it will still just control you, but you'll see it as outward events that are happening to you. So it will seem like it's fate, but it's really your unconscious, like pushing you towards it. And he's saying like, you should get control of your fate, get a conscious understanding of the unconscious, so that it doesn't present itself as fate, that you're kind of controlling your fate more.
Right. And so, okay, so so you and I both love Kanye. And I've been watching what's been going on right now, and there's this recent podcast with Eric Weinstein on it, and he was talking with Rogan, and it was pretty challenging to listen to it. But he had this one point about when Kanye said that he loves Hitler.
Yeah,
it's because when he hit that moment with Jesus, the I am gone, and then he goes into Donda and all this stuff. So he is identifying as Christ, and Christ loves everyone.
Yes.
And it's like, whatever you do to the least of me, you do to me kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Where the idea was that Kanye is trying to love everybody, including the absolute worst of us, like Hitler, but he's just not, the message is all fucked up. He's just not doing a good job conveying that. And for me, I don't have a problem with it, because I don't need Kanye to be anything else but an artist. And I want him to go into the wild places. Like I want him to
Exactly.
say the things that nobody else can say. Like I want, like Kanye fucking has done a lot for my artistic life. I mean, he has really helped me, you know, I really admire him. Like he goes into
Yeah.
a place from an artistic standpoint that is terrifying,
Yeah.
terrifying. And he just does it with swagger. And you're like, God damn.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
he's so good. Jesus is like, that
And
album
he's
is,
consistent too.
oh my
Like
God.
every one
Well,
of
his
his
last couple of
albums.
albums, I think, sir.
Yeah, yeah, the last couple have been a bit rough, but
Yeah.
before that, consistently every album was a masterpiece and they were all totally different from each other. Like from
Yeah.
like College Dropout, 808s and Heartbreak, my
Yeah.
beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
That, yeah.
But Yeezus for me is my favorite album of his.
Me too. It's
I've
one of my favorite
listened,
albums ever.
I'm still stunned by it. And I've listened to that album
Yeah.
hundreds of times. And it's
Yeah.
so dark. Like the
Yeah.
sound is dark, the lyrics and the stories that he's telling are dark. And I
Yep.
consider it like a shadow gospel in a way. Because
Yeah. Shadow Gospel.
it was the first
Should
time
write that down.
I heard the sound of a man who was struggling with Satan and Christ at the same time.
Yeah.
Like you could hear him struggling with it.
Yeah.
He took all of that pain of that paradox and created art out of it.
Right.
And somehow listening to that album has helped me become more conscious of my own dark side.
Right.
So yeah, we
But
have to give artists
so,
space to go
but
to those other places.
yes, but Kanye appeals to a lot of really impressionable youth. And so if Kanye's saying like, hey, the Jews are in power and the Jews have, you know, disproportionate control over artists in the record industry, and we need to get that power back by diminishing the Jews, whatever that means. And I love Hitler,
Yeah.
you know, double whammy. And then a youth is going like, oh, I don't understand the subtext of, you know, Kanye's actually embodying the spirit of Christ and trying to love it. You know, I mean, to a 12-year-old, you know, in Southside Chicago, like, what are you going to, like, there has to be some sort of responsibility because that is going to make things worse. So where is that line? You know, that's a rough one too.
Yeah. And I'm quite impressed by our culture at how we've given Kanye the space in public to say all
Yeah.
that. Like, yes, there's people trying to censor him, he's getting kicked off platforms, but for the most part, and I feel like American culture especially gives artists a ton of space to be able to make those mistakes, and we don't judge them as much. But yeah, I've got mad love for
but where is the line there? Let's seriously try to think about that, you know, because like, do we just absorb that as a culture and be like, yeah, there's probably gonna be some anti-Semitic neo-Nazis, like at least a couple that are gonna come, like, look at Kanye and be like, that makes a lot of sense, you know?
Yeah.
He probably did birth a handful of neo-Nazis, maybe.
Yeah.
So where's the line? Like, what do we do with that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like the line between hate speech and regular speech. That, like, you could say, no, this person is saying something wrong, it's negatively impressionable on other people, we're going to shut him up. Or and say, no, we're not going to allow any hateful speech. But as soon as you do that, like, things descend into chaos, because we need to allow hateful speech to allow for true speech. And that's the thing, is when I'm listening to someone like Kanye, it's not like, it doesn't sound like he's saying like what his belief is or what he knows. He's thinking. Like, when he's on a podcast and talking about these ideas and saying these extreme things, he's thinking. But he's just like thinking out loud, and they're complex ideas. He's caught up with them. He just had a terrible public divorce. Everyone's saying he's crazy. They're trying to put him on meds. Like, I can't even imagine what he's going through. But in terms of like where that line is for responsibility, it lies with Kanye. And
well, but it lies with us. But just in the last podcast, you were saying something that contradicts that, because you're saying if you do a lot of work and your work goes out into the world, there's a piece of you that goes out into the world and exists outside of your physical body. And so that you could say the same thing about Kanye. Like, Kanye is going out into the world and yeah, it's that line is like where it's just the thing that's so hard is that there's always a line, but it's never sharp. There's a line but it's always a gradient.
Yeah.
And so I don't know,
Well,
like right now, yeah, go ahead.
It just reminded me of that Dostoevsky quote, and this is an extreme line, but he said that everybody is responsible for everything that everyone else does all the time. So, because I could just say, yeah, I'm just responsible for me. I'm not responsible for you, Kanye, anyone else. But Dostoevsky takes that line of like, no, you're responsible for everyone else all the time. And that's the same idea that Jordan Peterson says about like, well, do your actions matter or not? And you could say, no, they don't matter, nothing matters, and be nihilistic. Or you could say that, some of my actions matter, but some of them don't. But that's kind of sitting on the fence. But he says, no, every single action matters, and every decision you make tilts the world towards heaven or hell. So it's like every individual has this ultimate responsibility for everyone else. And like you said, Kanye has put so much of his self into the world through his art that maybe we all have part responsibility for him and his actions in a way. We all have to take responsibility for everyone else in a way. And that's why we can't just reject someone. Like when someone's acting evil, we can't just outright reject them because we're rejecting part of ourselves.
Yeah. But then what? But okay. Well, do you believe in the death penalty?
I'm torn about this. But part of me thinks that there are some people who are embodying such a level of evil and they're not trying to get better at all. And them just being alive is tearing everyone else down and dragging us into hell. So I think,
and getting off on it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the other thing. It's like no remorse.
Exactly.
Like they're actually really enjoying it. And they'll tell you that they enjoy it. And they're like, you let me out of here, I will go do the same thing again and again and again until you kill me. So you might as well kill me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like there are, yeah.
But the Christian view is like loving even your enemies as much as you love yourself. And how can you, and thou shalt not murder. So I'm really torn about it. Like part of me thinks, yes, death penalty makes sense. There are cases when we should kill someone. They're being so evil. But I also think that we need to give them a chance for redemption and a chance to have remorse because I think that those people can be redeemed.
Yeah, but it's also like, if you're on a farm and a horse breaks its leg, you shoot the horse, It's like, in a way, it's like possible to maybe get that horse back to a place of health, but it's going to take so much time and resources and like it's just a judgment call at some point. Or if you see like maybe you hit an animal, while you're driving and you pull out, you hit a deer or something like that, and you're like, oh my God, like it's possible you could nurse this thing back to health, but no. And then you just shoot it in the head and you relieve its suffering because it's suffering. But then you also cancel out the chance for some sort of future flourishing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I suppose it depends on
depends on if that person wants to get better. If they want to be redeemed in some way, then we should give them that opportunity to. But
right. And this doesn't even call into account the fallibility of the judicial system, which is gonna make I don't know. I'm torn on it too. But I mean, my intuition is that yes, some people should be removed from the game board. Like you should not have some people on the game board. Yeah. Or maybe you just put them in a, tower, a cell forever if you don't want to kill, because then I don't know. The death part is, it's almost a more grace giving way out than making somebody live out the rest of their life without freedom.
Yeah.
It's only like I could see myself like maybe, I don't know, who knows? I've never been in that situation, but yeah, it's complicated. But then Yeah, so then conscience comes in. It's like conscience even in play in some people, doesn't sound like
Yeah.
it.
Yep. Yep. I think for some
Yeah.
psychopaths, they don't have that sense of conscience guiding them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. So what do you got coming up this week? What are you looking forward to this week?
Lots of work.
Yeah.
So just working my 9 to 5 day job, and outside
Mm-hmm.
of that, just writing. So I've put together like a solid plan for the next 6 months to finish the main script
Okay.
I'm working on. And I've kind of got a separate phase for production and editing, because it seems like the production process and editing process use totally different parts of my brain.
Yeah.
So I've just listed out like what are every single step that I need to take for production, and I've already got tons of it written. I just need to like compile
Yeah.
it, organize it, read some books again, fill in the gaps, and then I'm going to go into an editing phase for the next like 4 months. But I'm just like, I feel like I've stepped up my productivity, and I've got much more of a plan for attacking it now. Whereas before I was just like
Yeah.
every day or two, like writing a scene here and there. I wasn't very consistent with it. But now that
Yeah.
I've got like a solid structure and thing that I'm aiming at, like I think I could get this script done in the next 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
And now that I've got that goal and that structure, I'm just like motivated more, and I'm just getting
Mm-hmm.
after it every day. Like I want to tick things off that list. So
Yeah.
I'm feeling really good about my writing process, but it's painful as hell. Like
Yeah.
I'm exhausted. Like it takes everything out of me. I'm thinking about it from the
Wow.
morning I wake up, from at night when I go to bed, and it's an
Yeah.
obsession. It's like this painful obsession that it's like a monkey I've got to get off my back.
Yeah. Do you do your writing from that chair that you're in right now?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Do you ever try going out to like cafes or going out like to a park bench or anything like that?
Sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. I find that really helps a lot. I find that me doing work in a room with a lot of other people, it just kind of helps. Like if I'm stuck and I go to an active cafe, it can kind of get things going
Like
for me.
Benny's.
No, that's a little too Uncle Benny. Yeah, that's a it's a little too chaotic. There's a little too much going on there. And then there's a lot of loud Chinese guys that work that meet there a lot. So there'd be like a group of 10 Chinese people that are kind of aggressively talking. And I just find that like too much talking, especially Chinese, has like this kind of aggressive quality to it that it's kind of jarring. But then just generally put in my headphones and stuff. But yeah, I find you kind of got to hit the right balance of something that's busy but not, it's a little too like New York style,
Yeah.
like intent, like things coming and going, and it's just the layout of it isn't quite right for me.
Yeah.
But okay, cool. Well, you wanna wrap it here?
Yeah. Well, I'd be curious to know what you're doing this week, what you've got on.
Oh, this week. So I'm starting a new installation at a biotech venture capital fund in South San Francisco where they want this whiteboard installed. It's called a remarkable wall. So I'm doing this mural and I'm basically taping it all out in this geometric design. And then I'm having my assistant paint it. I'm doing a 6 foot by 4 foot canvas next to it. And that's a job that's got to get done by Friday, and I'm nervous about it getting done. I just hired a new person for operations that's doing all the project management and personal assistant. Like she just started 2 days ago, and so we're going through, like we just started using Asana,
Yeah.
and we're doing all of that. So I'm learning all of that. And then the other biotech campus that I'm working on in Hayward, I've done a bunch of these wayfinding monuments that are 15 feet by 4 feet, and they're all basically sculptures with my designs in it. And it's like an entrance monument to be able to show people where to turn into the campus. And then there's these different wayfinding monuments. This is all getting fabricated in Stockton. So we're going, Kincaid and I from Bonneville Labs are going to Stockton on Tuesday to be able to check out the fabrication process. And then also on this campus, I'm doing all the landscaping. So I'm working with the landscape architect to be able to move these like 2-ton boulders around and getting all these plants and rocks all laid out so that the entrance walk up to the building is really impressive. And it's a $180 million project that the financiers are flying in from all over the place to come check out on the 15th. And so it's like coming down to the wire of whether or not they're going to be impressed with what it is that we've done. Because they've taken a huge risk on me because the aesthetics of this campus is so aggressive. I mean, I've just really went full on into this. And so there's this compression happening with all these different elements, and I'm trying to learn how to run the company so that I have multiple job sites going on at the same time.
Yeah.
And then just a bunch of proposals and project management and other stuff coming up. So it's pretty hectic, but I'm hoping to be able to get the process of getting my ideas out into the world, getting the production line of execution solidified so that hopefully by the end of the year, I'll have a little bit more freedom to be able to work on my own stuff rather than trying to run the company, which is all my own ideas, but they're all just, it's just difficult when you're dealing with, architects and brokers and financiers and owner operators and project, builder, it's just a lot. And as you know, this is all very new to me. It's only been like a year. So I'm still in the trenches for trying to figure this out, but it's been good. But yeah, this week's that's going to be challenging for sure.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I'd love
we can
to
check.
on one of our upcoming podcasts, I would love to like do a deep dive into your art, kind of how it's evolved, because I find it fascinating that you've like scaled up from like individual art pieces to these huge, like large artworks in big corporate buildings, and it's pretty impressive. I want to talk to you about the challenges of scaling up an art business, because it seems like the business world and the world of art are kind of like they have some tension between each other. So I'd love to explore that with you.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm flailing in a lot of ways, I mean, I'm doing well enough that the company is surviving and we're getting in, clients are happy, and I'm learning, but it's a lot of, in the end, what will be seen as unnecessary suffering that I'm going through right now, because I'm just like, what is going on? Like, how am I? I just don't know how to do it. And like, I never went to college. I never worked in an office. I went from waiter to artist, and I didn't even know how to write emails. Like, so it's been brutal, but yeah, I mean, we can do all that. And yeah, and I'd love to show you what I'm working on, for sure.
Perfect, mate. Sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, man. Well, it's great chatting with you, and we'll be in touch for sure.
You too, mate.